this is Richie from the Mental Cell podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Brad Boatright of Audiosiege and From the Ashes Rise to the podcast. Thanks, Brad, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and of course I've got Howard, my co-host, who is fresh from what, Howard? Were you working
I wouldn't say fresh.
Okay.
More
you
like
were working
rotting
today,
on radiator. I've been working all week. I'm still working in school. So it's been, as you can imagine, it's been a tough all 12 months. But we're in the last 2 weeks of term. So we're off for the summer.
True.
So we're getting there. We're getting our just rewards, I think. We get a summer to relax and regroup.
And you can escape with myself and Brad for an hour talking metal.
Exactly. Metal and whiskey, Richie. You just cannot go fucking wrong, can you? Well, you can, but it's fun getting there.
And Brad, I must compliment you on your T-shirt as well. Nice to see Sacrilege being given a shout out.
Appreciate it.
Have you ever seen it?
I haven't. I did get to work on the remasters of Behind the Realms of Madness, which was a lot of fun, and I was stoked to do it. But yeah, longtime fan. I ended up, I was like probably 17 or 18 when I found that record in a used record store in Jackson, Mississippi, just on a whim, you know.
Oh my God.
And, yeah, it's still one of my favorites. It's so good.
Yeah, it's class, man. I don't think it has aged. It's one of those timeless.
It's aged really well.
Yeah.
Like ourselves, lad.
Well, speak for yourself. I don't know if I could say the same.
Remains to be seen, Howard.
Yeah, my back muscles have to have a word about that.
So, Brad, whereabouts in America are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in the Mid-South. I grew up in North Mississippi, about 60 miles south of Memphis. And then I lived in Tennessee for a bit, in Nashville and outside of Nashville for a few years. And then I came out to Portland, Oregon, which is where I am now. And I've been here for 20 years. So,
wow.
Yeah. That's a stretch.
I've lived here longer than I lived anywhere else, including my hometown. So,
do you ever venture back?
Yeah. My family still lives there. And we actually, my family and I, July and August of last year, took a trailer down there, hitched the trailer to the car, and just drove, made a trip out of it. It was like being on tour, and surprised my parents. They had no idea we were coming, but yeah, it was a fun trip. And like I said, it was a lot like being on tour. So,
yeah. How long did that take you?
Well, we were gone for about 3.5 weeks, so it took us 10 days to get there, but we were stopping a lot. We were. I mean, we stayed 2 nights at a place in California. We, spent a day and a half at the Grand Canyon, things like that. And, nice. It wasn't like being on tour where you can just tolerate your bass player complaining about the drive. When you got an 8-year-old complaining about the drive, it's a little bit different.
They don't get it, do they, at that age, man?
Oh, man, no. So
you can show them photographs later when they get older. They might appreciate it as an angry teenager or something.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm making sure to print out all the photos too, so that we can have a photo album, for when the grid goes out.
Yeah.
How influential was Nashville on your musical journey, Brad? You said you spent some time there. From an Irish perspective, Nashville would seem like a real hub of music, of country music, and a bustling place where there's activity in that regard all the time. It must have had some influence on you.
Yeah, that's actually why I moved there, because it was a path out of my hometown that I could use to, like, there's a actual college outside of Nashville that focuses on the recording industry, and that's Middle Tennessee State. So I ended up leaving Mississippi and going there. And like there was a deal that you could go for in-state tuition because there was nobody in Mississippi that offered audio engineering courses or majors. And so, yeah, like that kind of fed the business and the industry in Nashville. It was a lot different in the 90s when I went there. It was more business and industry oriented, and there was a lot less accessibility from independent musicians and things like that, just because of the prohibitive costs or the fact that it was a little more closed of a system. sort of the way kind of Hollywood was at the time, but not as much.
Like an actor
I don't
going
know,
to
it's just,
I'd imagine, or something like that.
yeah, it's kind of different because like I was talking about this on another podcast I did recently, but the accessibility to recording and audio tools in general has come so far in the past 25 years. And, you know, I went to Nashville. I left for Nashville when it was still, you know, you couldn't really, it was a little more difficult to do things yourself on a shoestring budget back then. You still had to spend a little bit of money, you know, and the results, you know, still were going to be tied to your gear and your talents as well. These days, you know, you've got a little bit bigger of a jump that you can make with a lot less. So yeah,
it's interesting you mentioned the technology because I think we're due an exponential growth in this thing in the last year, because one of the common denominators amongst musicians in the last 12 to 15 months or so has been home recording.
Absolutely.
You know, I think everybody has dipped their toe into it a little bit, I think, just to keep busy and to keep active. I'm wondering, will that have a kind of an influence on the way recording is going to go?
Yeah. Or I mean, there's people who go out and get a Focusrite interface, kind of like the one I'm using here, or, you know, like just a cheap little USB interface or something, and some microphones and headphones, and they just start recording themselves. Or they don't even use microphones and they just plug in and use amp simulators and drum software and things like that. And honestly, it often sounds pretty good. And yeah, it has increased. I've seen a lot more kind of one-person projects over the last year and a half.
Yeah,
I've seen a lot of
in Ireland. Yeah.
We've seen it here in Ireland, and Cork as well. Yeah, there's been 3 or 4 I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, and a lot of like remote kind of working. That's always been on the rise too. Like people from different countries collaborating, sending files. I mean, that's another thing. Like bandwidth. The way that you can send audio files now is, I mean, it's so much quicker, you know, like you don't have to put a CD in the mail. You know, you don't have to tell your roommates, hey, don't use the phone for the next 4 days. You know, I'm going to be trying to send an album over dial-up.
Yeah, there was a band there, Acid Age. They were only on 3 or 4 episodes ago. They recorded all theirs using analog. And they're a bunch of kids, you know, they're young.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
They're exceptionally young, aren't they? Like 23, 24 or something.
Yeah.
I can't keep up with these kids.
I mean, even going like analog, like you know, like that's another part of it, is that even the good analog stuff is getting more, or good sounding analog stuff is getting more accessible. You know, there's no longer this like, well, if you want cheap, you have to go all digital, and if you want all analog, you have to spend some money. Like, I mean, top of the line analog is usually going to reflect its price and like with its sound. Sometimes might be a little bit overpriced, but I mean, you can still, you can go all analog and still sound pretty good. You know, I mean, there was a time where like if you went all analog again on a shoestring budget, there were going to be some issues, right? So.
Like,
and I mean, talent overcomes everything, of course.
Yeah. That's really like the bottom line, isn't it?
Like, what stage was sound secondary to music for you?
I think they always went hand in hand, honestly.
Really, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, I remember my dad listening to music with my dad, running errands with him when I was probably 7 or 8, and him tapping his foot on the floorboards of his truck. He's like, tap your foot to the beat, you know, like that's what you do when you drive. And I was like, oh, that makes a really cool sound. You know, it's this kind of hollow sound when we're stopping. You know, I can tap it with the beat of the music, or in rhythm with the engine or whatever, you know, like, so I think it's always gone hand in hand.
Wow. Even at that early age.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then forming your first band, what are your memories?
Being in a really small room and playing with a group of friends and making music, making sounds that we could jam to, you know, that we kind of putting the notes in our heads together as a group, you know, together. and a lot of heat. I remember it was really hot. So yeah, it was like the feeling of camaraderie, the feeling of creating something together. And that's probably what I remember more than anything. If I did remember the sound, it was probably a really bad guitar sound on my part with some really cheap gear, but yeah.
And just what was the scene back then? Was it was it more hometown, or were you kind of looking to get into cities as teenagers?
Well, yeah, again, I grew up in a small town in an area that was, the closest urban area was Memphis, and Memphis had a pretty good punk scene going back to the 80s. They had a really great punk and hardcore scene. So I was lucky, I did get to see some great bands at the Antenna Club in Memphis. And occasionally they would come down and play the Hoka Theater in Oxford, Mississippi, which was I kind of consider Oxford my hometown at this point because it's central to the two towns that my parents lived when I was growing up. And
what kind of bands were they? Agnostic Front, Cro-Mags, or
they would tour, they would all tour to Memphis. But a friend of mine, I was really lucky that there were some older friends that I made in Oxford, like my friend Newt and my friend Gentry and my friend Mikey, and they had a punk band. Gentry was in a punk band called Nightmare on Sesame Street from Oxford, and Newt was in a band called Dead Fish, which was kind of a crossover band. And Newt had moved to Minneapolis and written for Profane Existence, which was a fanzine from Minneapolis, long running fanzine that covered a lot of punk and DIY stuff. And then there was also a fanzine from Oxford called Assault with Intent to Free, which covered a lot of music and turned me on to a lot of things. So this was back in the day when I learned about a lot of music from record reviews and columns and perusing the record collections of my friends and asking if I can, copy, put something on a cassette or something. So, I was just lucky to have the right people early in my life who were just a couple years older than me, who could
punch in the right direction,
show you the way, show you the path.
Yeah, and I played music with them too. I ended up playing music with them as well, and it was just, everything just kind of worked out. It was like a game of, I don't know if you guys watched The Price is Right over there. It was like, there's this Plinko is the name of the game where this guy drops through the little pegs. It's been like a game of Plinko. Yeah.
So you would then have access then to a lot of touring bands, as you said, and the scene was more punk, more than metal or anything else, really.
Yeah, way more punk, and it was very small. I mean, there were, I could count on both hands, with people who would actually consider themselves punks back then. And, there was this crossover with the people who were just a little bit weird and didn't really have a place to fit in, or, liked a little more of the grunge stuff or the indie rock stuff that was coming out in the early 90s. They would associate with us and stuff like that. And we would have house shows and go to house shows, and bands would stop through and play Oxford or Memphis. And it was a good time.
Yeah, it sounds like it, man.
Great time.
And I was looking at some of the old videos of the Cooters.
That was my first band. That was my band with Newt and Gentry. Yep.
The Waffle House song. I was listening it all day today.
Yeah. Yeah, they did that after I left the band, and that was an homage to all the times we'd go see a show in Memphis or play in Memphis or something, and we'd stop at the Waffle House for we've got some stories about those trips to the Waffle House as well.
Replenish yourselves before you go home to the couch. And
I wouldn't call it replenishing. I'd call it scattering, smothering, and covering.
But what struck me about it when I was listening to it was it sounded really, in the ballpark of Ireland and the UK. It reminded me of bands here. We have like Curb Dog and Therapy and all these sort of early 90s punk bands, or crossover punk going into this new indie wave kind of stuff. I'm just wondering, were you influenced by anything in this direction in the European sense or the UK sense? Because it really does sound a lot of that kind of genre, let's say, or something like that. But you can kind of taste the little nitbits of UK bands and so on. Would that be correct? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. And even like Irish bands like FUAL. Do you guys remember them? Fuck Up and Live. I still have that 12-inch. It's great.
That's a fucking blast from the past.
Wow.
Jesus,
yes, it is.
a deep cut, Brad. A deep cut.
I'm full of them. And see, that's one that I got that at Shangri-La in Memphis, a record store that sold, independent records and punk records. And I got it based on a review that I read. And I loved it, didn't know what it was going to sound like before I heard it, before I took it home. There was a lot of stuff that I picked up like that. So, yeah.
Where are all those things now, man? Have you traded them in and
nope?
Like, he's one of those. Respect, cool.
Yeah,
nice.
I mean, there's a few records over the years that I've gotten rid of and traded. I haven't sold records since. I mean, the last time I sold these days, like, so I think the last time I sold a record, it was when I realized that I shouldn't be selling records, and it was when I moved to Portland. So, like. There was a time before that when we were on tour and I brought a little handful of records just to help pay my rent while I was gone. It was, you had to still pay the bills while you go out on tour, and we would come home with barely anything. And so it was just kind of to help cover my costs, or, ending up being irresponsible and just buying more records on tour. But I think the last time I sold a record was after I moved to Portland, and I had a little stack of 7-inches that I was selling, and a friend of mine came over, and man, I lived in this punk house. It was the house that my friends in Tragedy, they were on tour in Europe. And so I was subletting Billy's room in the basement, and they were all subletting their rooms. So it was just this big, like, punk house with but it was like a temporarily inhabited, or temporary inhabitants. Right. So I've got this stack of 7-inches, and people are using, seriously, the free weeklies for toilet paper. There's no toilet paper in the house.
Jesus.
There's no toilet paper in this house. And Portland was a lot different back then. It was walking to a coffee shop was a little bit farther. And I had to go, right? So a friend of mine came over, and I'm like, man, I'm selling some records. And so he bought a 7-inch for $2. And I'm like, cool, man. Well, good seeing you. Let's hang out again soon. After he left, I took that $2 to the corner store, and I bought a 4-pack of toilet paper for $2. And I'm running down the street, and I'm like, shit, man, anybody who sees me running with a 4-pack of toilet paper is going to be like, that guy's got to take a shit, right? Like, he's got to go. I'm like running back, right? So I get home, and then I do some thinking, in the bathroom. I'm like, man, I'm basically going to wipe my ass with a 7-inch here. I sold a 7-inch to buy toilet paper. So I told myself I wasn't going to do that anymore. I think that's the last record I sold.
That's a classic, man. Oh man, that's brilliant. And From Ashes Rise, tell us a bit about that band, how it formed, who are the people in it?
So that is me, of course, and my brothers at this point, John Wilkerson, Dave Atchison, and Derek Willman. And that formed from, after I moved to Middle Tennessee. Dave, our drummer, had a band that had just broken up, so he was looking to play music again. And again, it was, the game of Plinko, just everything falling into place in the right order and at the right time. And I met Dave at a show, and said, hey, would you be interested in playing music? And he was like, back then he was like, yeah, I'm interested in auditioning, and we'd become really close and over the years. But we set up a time. I showed up at his house with my amp and guitar, and we played, and it was immediately okay, this is going to be fun. And we're going to be able to write some music that we want to hear. And, I talked John into moving up from Jackson, which is where he lived, in Jackson, Mississippi. So he moved up and joined the band about 6 months after. It was me and another guitar player, Jeff, initially, and Jeff left the band, and John came up and joined. And we had a singer, and then the singer left the band. So it went through a few embryonic formations, and pretty much settled on where we're at now, which is, the three of us, John, Dave, and me, and Derek, who is from Wisconsin, actually. And so Derek, actually, we met him when he was 16 in Wisconsin on our one of our first tour, or our first big tour, the first time we played Wisconsin, and our bass player like quit the band. Our van broke down. We had to drive back. We went back to Nashville from Atlanta, and we were getting the van fixed and canceling shows every day. And then, so we were stuck there for a week and a half, and our bass player quit, and we just decided like, hey, when the van's fixed, like, let's just go. Like, you know, like we've got all these shows booked. So we, you know, the three of us drove up to Massachusetts, and this was in 98. And so we drove up to Massachusetts overnight and caught up with where we were supposed to be in our shows and stuff. And then by the time we got to Wisconsin, like we played a show with Derek, who was with Derek's band. Derek's band. So
Derek's band.
But I remember saying like, hey, like, let's talk to this guy. Like, let's see if he wants to, it's summer, you know, he's not in school. Let's see if he wants to go on tour with us. Let's see if he wants to join.
Jesus, I dumped him at 16. Fucking jail for
he moved to Portland and joined another band called Remains of the Day, who we played more shows with. When we were still in Nashville and toured out here, we did the West Coast leg of our tour was with his band Remains of the Day. And, you know, and Billy had joined the band. Our friend Ryan played bass for a little while. Ryan was the singer in Burned Up Blood Dry from Arkansas. He was on bass for a little while. And then Billy from Tragedy was on bass. And then when Billy had some scheduling issues come up, he ended up leaving the band. He's still a good friend of ours. Leaving the band, and Derek joined, and that was in, I believe, 2004. And so like Derek joined, like, you know, 6 years after we met him and considered asking him to play, just, you know, because that was just how it was going to work. Right. Like that was just, we knew it was kind of meant to be. So it's the four of us. And then John, Dave, and I we all have kids who are within a couple of years apart from each other. And so they play together pretty often. Cool. They were together in the backyard this weekend, and they had decided to have a protest against their parents, which was pretty interesting. They were like fists up in the air and everything.
As long as it wasn't a dirty protest and you need a toilet roll, it'd be grand, you know.
Well, I had some smoke bombs. I ended up throwing one in the backyard.
Do you know, Brad, how much of a draw is it to get to Europe as much as a draw it is for European bands to play America?
That's a tough question for me to answer, because I mean, the last tour we did in Europe was 2005. Mm-hmm. Although we've played Europe a few times since then, but they've been fests and one-offs and things like that. So I don't know. It's a tough question. I know the American border has traditionally been very tough, even coming back through it if you're American. A lot of times it's tougher when you're driving. You know, when you got a van full of equipment and things like that, if you're coming in through an airport and things like that, but you know, it's luck of the draw. Sometimes you'll end up with that, you know, border guard who's just having a bad day and wants to turn everybody around and put them back on that 12-hour flight. So it's a tough question for me to answer. It's an even tougher question to answer now, you know, now that things are how they are and have, you know. So I'm not sure, really.
What I don't know, you probably misunderstand me. I was just on about like how much of a dream, maybe be the better way to describe it, for American bands to play Europe. And I know European bands always want to get to America. So
gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I thought you were asking about kind of how difficult or easy it was for each.
Why don't you answer that anyway? Yeah.
I mean, again, I think that's a difficult question to answer. I think if you're really, I can speak for myself, like having been weaned on European punk and hardcore, getting to Europe, getting to tour Europe the first time. We've toured there twice. Like getting to tour there the first time was pretty cool, and it was a dream come true. It was also like there were some organizational differences. I'm not going to say one is better than the other, just for fear of offending people.
America's better.
There were some like it was like there's just some differences.
I've never been to America, but it can't be worse.
Well, I mean, there were okay, we don't have a lot of squats over here, right? Like and I'm saying we don't have a lot because I don't know if the number's actually 0 or not. But I've never played a squat in America, right? And the squats in Germany were all like very organized, and
it's a big part of the music scene in Europe.
It's huge, and it's iconic. It's iconic as well. And, that was very impressive to us. It wasn't like, oh, hey, let's find an empty building and plug in or hook up a generator. It was all like very well done. To where, if the word squat wasn't attached to it, you would be playing a club, right? Like you would just a normal club, like, there's a bar taking your money. There's people like actually charging admission at these places. There's set times. There's a sound person. There's a, it was really well done. That's one of the main cultural differences, obviously. And then, like drives, like in the US, like east of the Mississippi, you can get away with averaging about 3 to 4 hours between shows. And once you go out west, things are a lot further apart, and you might have to drive 8 to 16 hours or something between shows. So, that was kind of a funny moment, like asking one of the people we were with in Germany, like, how far do we have to go? Like, oh, it's really far. It's about 4 hours, We're like, oh, okay. I mean, there was one time, like we were coming from Finland to Sweden, and like, so we played Sweden, took the ferry to Finland, played a few shows, and then we had to go back to Sweden to play some more shows. And we missed the ferry that night just because the show was too late. And we were like, oh man, what are we going to do? Like, well, look at the map, and you can drive. I mean, you can make the drive. You just go up north of the Arctic Circle and come back down, into Sweden. And we figured it was going to be about 6 hours. And like, the couple guys that were with us were like, we're like, come on, like, how hard could it be? Like, we're just like, well, let's just do it overnight. And we did it. It was fine. Like we get up way up north, and there's like, it's like, oh, that's a moose. Slow down, because if we hit that, we're totaling the van, and it's going to walk away. And there's ice. There's ice everywhere. It was just like an ice fortress, but the road was fine. And we did it in probably 6 hours. So
amazing.
It wasn't too big of a deal. We were like, why would we take the ferry? Like, what? This makes a lot of sense. Like, why doesn't everybody do this?
And festivals then, Brad, any memories of festivals in Europe? Meeting any particular bands or playing on the same bills with heroes?
Yeah, lots. Let's see. We played with the X on tour once. That might not have even been a festival. That might have just been another show. I believe that was in Germany. The past few festivals we've played in Europe have been just, it's been ridiculous. Like, you got like Hellfest, right? It's like
being there 4 or 5 times. Yeah,
everything is
Discharge, GBH, Leonard Skinner, and Megadeth, right? Like, so that was pretty cool. It was great being in our little room at Hellfest, and we were right next to Turbo Negro's room, and Happy Tom comes over and he's like, hey, and we're like, good to meet you. And that was funny. Yeah, King Diamond's door was like shut the entire time. Everybody else, like Leonard Skinner, had their door open. They're walking out to play with their guitar cases. It's like, oh, hi, like it's Leonard Skinner right there. And, Molly Hatchet's doing shots with our bass player. And but King Diamond's got his door shut because he's King Diamond.
Conjuring a demon or something, or fucking
gurgling. I don't know.
Yeah, I was actually at that one for Skinner. I remember that. Yeah. We went down the front. It was a beautiful day as well. They had all the strippers up behind over this bar, and all the strippers were there. Skinner, Blair, I'd say it was around 26, 28 degrees, piss drunk, going, doesn't get better get any better than that.
It's just that was a funny one too. 26 or 28 degrees over here, Brad, is like hotter than the sun,
Yeah.
I know you guys are used to your 40 degrees and 50 degrees Celsius. You get to 20, we start to melt.
I'm doing the math in my head. I always think of somebody saying, why are you wearing a jacket? It's like 20 degrees outside in British Columbia or in Quebec one time. That's like what I think of. Like, that's my frame of reference. That was a funny one, because when Skinner played, like, there were a lot of people in the crowd waving Confederate flags. And we were all like, yeah,
can't do it anymore.
It's been slower.
It's
been slower to catch up here. The rebel flag thing. Where we're from in Cork here, Brad. It's traditionally nicknamed the Rebel County. So when the local GAA team, GAA is an Irish sport. So when the local team plays, I guess when people were allowed to attend to the matches and so on, it was Confederate flags all around the stadium, 40,000 people holding it up, But
and I shouldn't even say the Confederate flag.
Totally out of context, with no intention of racism or anything like that. Just ignorance of, this is a rebel place in America with the same colors as our team. Let's wave it,
Yeah.
But I think it's been banned, Richie, in the last couple of years, has it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's not even the Confederate flag. Like it's not actually what the Confederacy flew in the Civil War. That's the funny part. I mean, yeah. So that was an interesting experience. But yeah, and I also remember those outdoor festivals, they get muddier as the day goes, and you start I think Hellfest was there were a couple streams that got wider. And as you're walking, towards places, you're like, okay, we've got to find a crossing here. And you look uphill and they've got all the toilets and everything up there. Yeah. Or you see a line of people pissed drunk against the fence and against the wall.
The worst thing about Hellfest, or the best thing, it depends on your viewpoint. Actually, you must have been really happy, Brad. Did you get the amount of vinyl shops in Hellfest must have blown you away?
Yeah, it was, yes. Mm-hmm. And we were expecting our son at that point, and I got him a Motorhead onesie, which was that was my score of the show. Brought that home.
Bonus points there for that.
It said Sleepyhead. It was it said Sleepyhead in the Motorhead logo.
But
really cool.
There's this area anyway, Howard, behind where all the vinyl is, and it's we had some name for it anyway, but they just sell wine in that area. So you just go in and you fill up your 2 liters of wine.
Stroll around looking at records, spending all your money.
At 12 o'clock during the daytime, man. Oh,
dangerous mix, drinking vinyl. You're not going to come out of there with money in your pocket, are you?
I think there were definitely a few people who had too much and passed out with their heads in one of those streams.
You probably stood over me, Brad, at one stage. Little did we know. So when you got back and obviously with the band as well, you were dabbling with maybe producing some of their stuff, or at what stage did the musician become the producer? And
I've always kind of had a hand in that, because I've always kind of been over the shoulder of the person we were working with and things like that. Mm-hmm. But it kind of, I guess it coincided with me trying to plan some things out with, I've always wanted to do mastering, and I've always had an ear for it. And it kind of coincided with me trying to work my way into doing that as a career.
Were your bandmates actively encouraging you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Cool. Yes, they were. I've been lucky to have friends who were very supportive and who would encourage me, or lucky to have friends who would doubt me at times too. There's nothing better than proving people wrong. But it was, we're we've only recorded a 7-inch, 2-song 7-inch since the last album we did. So
2009, I think it was.
Yeah.
It's quite a stretch.
Man.
Yeah. It's been
11 years.
Been a long one.
Fucking hell.
Yeah.
12.
But it's, and I was talking about this on the last podcast. I did it as well, not to sound like a broken record, but there was I was likening mastering to mixing, where mastering is kind of setting up the gear. Mixing could be putting the gear in the van, right? Fitting everything together. Cutting back on a couple of guitar cabinets to make room for more drums, or vice versa.
Tetris.
It's kind of like an analogy. Loading the van is like mixing, taking everything out of the van and setting it up on stage, or on the floor or whatever. That's kind of the mastering part of it to me. That's where playing a lot of improvised places where we didn't have microphones on the guitar amps and stuff like that. I developed an ear for it, and we had a certain process and certain ways that we would do things. And so it just naturally came from that, right? Like mastering just naturally came from that. And it was also a way for me to stay involved with music while I wasn't actively playing it as much as I used to.
Yeah.
I was looking through the list of bands that are on your roster that you've recorded, and what struck me, first of all, is the sheer volume. You must be a very, very busy man.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like sometimes I feel like I could be busier, but yeah.
Yeah, it's relentless. But there was a couple that stood out to me. The Full of Hell was one, and
Yes.
Sono. I think it was a couple of live records I did for Sono. But first, what came to my mind when I saw Full of Hell was how the hell do you get all those layers to sit on top of each other and sound cohesive? Because it's amazing. The record sounds amazing, but it's just so noisy and you must have been pulling your hair out with this thing.
No, not really. That like those records are pretty easy for me.
Really?
Like, yeah, and I think if I was mixing them, like it would probably be a bit different. But that's, I mean, I think that like Kevin Bernstein and Kurt Ballou, the two people who have done their records, have done really, really great jobs on those, and they just made my job easy. I don't really have to. Yeah. The stuff that I really like have a tough time with is often things that are inconsistent or things that were mixed in a poorly sounding room, like that have weird imbalances, things like that really need to be corrected. When there's a lot of layers on something like that, like that's, I mean, the hard part's kind of done, like I just run it through the gear, like make sure nothing's lopsided and just slam the shit out of it sometimes.
That's a band now, Sono. I saw them at Hellfest. I lasted 10, 15 minutes and I had to go. Too much wine and smoke.
Noise. I've never seen them live, but I know a few people who have, and they said the same thing. It's like being underwater for 10, 15 minutes and then you got to go back and take a break and have a think for yourself and maybe go back again.
So approaching Brad, how would you approach that?
Well, Greg is a really good friend of mine, and that's how I ended up with that and a lot of that cool. Southern Lord stuff. And that is more, I mean, being a guitar player, it's kind of like, it's another thing it's not that hard because it's kind of like just setting up a guitar sound, right? Like it's a little bit different in that the dynamic range doesn't really have the same effect. Like you're not like measuring the dynamic range of that as much, or you're going to like really kind of start pulling your hair out because there's no dynamic range at times just from the sheer low end and the fact that it's like sustained notes, right? Like something with dynamic range is going to have a lot of transients, it's the waveforms are going to be up and down. Guitars are pretty much kind of steady state. And if you're aiming for a dynamic range by mastering a band like Sun, you're not going to get it just right. So you're going to have to throw a lot of that out the window. And like I said, it was just throw that out the window and act like it's a guitar sound, right? Like, cause that's a lot of what they're showcasing is their guitar sound, is the interplay between the instruments and just sheer low end.
Yeah. And I mean, as the reason why you're on the show as well is because you've definitely helped out a lot of Irish bands, the likes of Baylor, Nomadic Rituals, Cormona, Abaddon, Incarnate, So Much for the Sun. What kind of research would you have to do with those bands? Would you be aware of previous albums, or does it depend on the communication you're given? How do you approach?
Yeah, sometimes I do. Like I'm really lucky because I get to discover a lot of music through music that I'm being given to work on.
Yes.
So, there's times where like with Abaddon Incarnate, like they're quite prolific, right? Like so I think they had done like a few records before the one that I was given. So, I look into them, just to kind of see, like a lot of times I'm kind of seeing not necessarily what they're going for, because I can usually hear what a band is going for, but kind of to see what direction they might want to take with the mastering, right? Like if they want something that's really, really pushed or something that's a little more dynamic. I think we're kind of through the loudness wars where everything was getting slammed. I like to get things, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I like to get things loud, but I also like to keep things dynamic. So my challenge is to get things loud while retaining the punch and the transients. And sometimes I don't succeed with that on the first pass or two. And sometimes I go, I'm too conservative. That's kind of what I consider like the first pass sometimes to kind of be there for, is to gauge the direction that the band might be wanting to go, because I rely on their feedback. So yeah, there's a lot of times where I will look into someone's catalog, like prior catalog or back catalog, just to kind of see, right? Like, and then you can kind of, it won't tell you a whole lot sometimes, but it can help with your instinct and your reasoning to make certain decisions. Yes.
And sometimes, again, would you have to jump in and say, okay, maybe the band has given me 7 songs and they're in a certain sequence. Would you recommend maybe song 5 will go to, song 2?
Absolutely, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
You would?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm a big proponent of sequencing a record properly. Because it keeps a record interesting, and so, yeah, I will absolutely do that. I think that it's important. I think that I can tell you there's some records out there that I think are, flawlessly sequenced. And that's a big part of why I still listen to them. And so I'm at the point these days where sometimes with song spacing, I won't do this with the order, but I will do this with song spacing where I'll just do it without consulting the band, just because I feel like it's right. And then if they tell me hey, put this time back in there, then I'll do it. But I'll time out the gaps, right? If it's something like da 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 da, then it's on the count when the next song comes in, right? So, or if there's, I like having the first, I like sequencing things like a batting lineup, right? Your high percentage first batter, your second 2, maybe fast, smaller guys, going to steal some bases. And then your fourth guy is going to be your home run hitter, right? So there's some times where, and I think those first 4 songs are really important. And I think the spacing is even more important with those. So yeah, there's times where I will suggest to a band, maybe moving some things around. And I'll do that, especially if it comes to vinyl, if the sides are lopsided, if they've got a side A that might be 12 minutes and side B is 18 minutes and they can rearrange things to get 15 minutes aside. Why wouldn't you do that? Right. So
a practical approach to things like that is very important, but it must cause a lot of conflict, I'd imagine, with some bands with a very strong personalities and have a very stubborn idea of how they want the record to sound and sequence. Have you ever come up against difficulty in that regard, in terms of conflict with those guys?
If they feel strongly about it, I'm not going to push it. I mean, I just kind of always approach it like saying, hey, here's some unsolicited advice, just as a listener. Like when I'm listening to your record and enjoying it, right? This is what I feel comes naturally. If they say, no, this is how we have it, or hey, well, yeah, we'd love to do that, but the artwork's already done, I'm just gonna be okay, cool.
We'll so there's that side of it as well. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, you won't get bands that have committed to the artwork to change around, even though, that's a side that you wouldn't think about. And as well, Brad, the vinyl resurgence is incredible over here in Europe. I don't know what it is in America. I think I was looking at, was it 8 or 9 million sales in 2020 for the first half in America alone. But how important is it for bands to master for vinyl?
Quite important. If they want it to sound good. It's very important, because you're dealing with a physical medium, so you have to absolutely make sure that the dynamic range and everything is correct, and that the frequencies aren't the frequencies that poke out on both ends of the spectrum aren't poking out excessively and hogging up the room on the vinyl. Length of sides is very important too. There's a graphic out there that people can look up and find, and it's a triangle, right? A triangle of 3 different things: low end, volume, and low end volume and.
But I've been trying to get Richie to jump on the vinyl wagon. You know, Richie's a bit reluctant to get on it. And,
so if you want, it's basically like if you want more low end, you're going to have to come down and it's time. Jeez, low end, volume, and time.
Okay.
So if you have more time, you have less low end and less volume. More volume, you have to have less time and low end, and they all interact together. It was time all along, guys.
There you go, man.
Anyway, so low end, volume, and time, right? So like you're dealing with a physical medium. You're dealing with a side of a record that's a certain size, and you're trying to fit enough music into these physical grooves that are all next to each other. And you know, when you're going to squeeze 22, 23 minutes onto a record, you know, those grooves are going to do this, right? And when you've got lateral movement that's giving you your low end, and side to side music or movement that's giving you your stereo image and mid-range stuff, that gets a lot narrower and the bandwidth gets a lot smaller. And with the dynamic range of vinyl being so low, when you start cutting records really quiet to compensate for excessive time or excessive loss of dynamics through limiting and things like that, then you're effectively turning up the noise floor, because for someone to listen to that at a volume, you know, a reasonable volume, they're going to have to crank things to the point to where they're also amplifying surface noise and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you're spot on, but I think probably with this in the 1970s and 80s, where vinyl was the main source of supply, certainly. But I think nowadays bands are more releasing a vinyl as an afterthought when they can afford it. So probably the mastering is done at that stage, and they're just putting it on vinyl, and you're probably missing, as you say, a lot of that.
I mean, people will come back to me saying like, "Hey, we're going to release this on vinyl. Like, can you remaster it?" And I save everything, so I've still got the mixes, and I'm like, absolutely, you know, I can do that. I can master this for vinyl. Or people, you know, think ahead and they're like, you know, we don't have plans to do this, but it's not that much more to get vinyl masters, and so let's do that. But I always do recommend it, because using digital masters, especially if they're just slammed to high heaven, like the cutting engineer is going to turn it. They're going to turn it down and give it a quiet cut.
Well, Howard, you're getting ready there, man. You've the album done. Have you thought about this? Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I think every album that I've been involved in the last couple of years has been mastered for vinyl. I used to listen to a lot of vinyl when I was a teenager, but then Napster came along and we got these compressed MP3s, and it fucking ruined my ear for many years. But it was just so accessible that I just went with it for maybe 5 to 10 years. But since the beginning of the pandemic, I've returned to vinyl in a big way, and it was actually our own record, Richie, that I was listening to, because we got it delivered at the time, you know, it arrived. And I'd heard, you know, we'd had the record mastered for CD, and we have it up in Spotify and so on. And I'd be listening to it, and I do enjoy it. But listening to it on vinyl, I mean, I was hearing all the little scratches and mistakes that I had made, and it was brilliant. You know, it just felt far more. I don't know, real. I don't know, everybody goes on about vinyl being this special experience and whatnot, but there is something to
immersive.
It. Sure. It is immersive. There is something to it, and particularly when you listen to your own music, I think you hear the, you know, the fart from your ass, Richie. You know, it's in the room, like. Yeah. The only way it's immersive, Brad, is if you're allowed the time to fuck off to your room and nobody disturb you. That's only when it's immersive. And those moments are rare and far between, unfortunately.
They're quite rare. Quite rare. But I just broke out my old Kenwood receiver, which plugged that in at the house, and just going through some just old classic records that I've always loved. But I mean, I enjoy a good record really no matter how I'm listening to it. I can put on an album on my phone, and if it's great enough and I know it by heart, I'm going to enjoy it. I'll set my phone on the counter while I'm, you know, doing things at home and just listen to something. I mean, it sounds really odd for me to say that, but like, it sounds okay. I'm used to, like, I've listened to some great albums in the van, you know, going down the road in the middle of summer where we, you know, without an AC, and we're just we got the windows open. It's a loud ass van. Our stereo is not very loud. And like you're listening to a cassette that just, sounds like that. And I'm enjoying it. So,
yeah,
when you know a record by heart, there's you don't need the audiophile experience, I think,
But so, Brad, how do you balance the rawness with certain bands, we'll say, want, and the sleekness of modern digital recording techniques?
Oh, well, there's a lot of tools that I have at my disposal. There's a lot of times if somebody wants something really raw, or if somebody wants something distorted or grainy, it's going to come to me like that. And there's not a lot that I need to add in the mastering stage, but there are times where I'll get something in the band's like, we like this, everything's balanced, but it just feels too clean. We want it pushed a little bit. We want it distorted. So again, it's just with what I've got, I've got different tools at my disposal, and it matters what the band, what direction they want, and communication is a big part of that. Then, it's all communication. It's usually I can gauge, like I said, which direction the band wants to go with things, but sometimes I need to do a pass or two to really get an idea with that. So yeah, there's digital. We're lucky because digital is you can't hear it. As there were times where you could hear, if something was all digital. And these days, I mean, you could tell me like Dark Side of the Moon. Okay, like you could tell me that like if that was recorded today and you said that was done entirely digital in the box, I wouldn't question it. But at the same time, there's digital clean and there's analog clean, right? So like if somebody wants something clean, there's different ways of approaching it. So, sometimes that might be just staying, keeping with an all digital signal path. And sometimes that means going out of the box and using like a pristine EQ, not pushing things too hard.
Yeah. Probably keeping a holistic view ultimately at the end of it.
Yeah. And like, distortion is kind of like painting. It's like painting with colors, right? And like you've got so many colors in your palette, and I like having those colors, and I like working with that kind of stuff because it's fun. It's like guitar amps, right? Like a lot of guitar amps, as a guitar player, like a lot of the differences in guitar amps are just from the kind of music that we all play and listen to. Like we know the differences from their gain channels and from the distortion that they put out. So, you give me anything, I'm going to be happy with the clean tone, but the distortion sound, I'm going to be a lot pickier with. So, I like to add a little bit of distortion to things sometimes, or like push, like I've got some API and Neve modeled op amps, or a piece of gear that uses Neve and API op amps. And I like pushing that sometimes, or like pushing an inductor EQ, to get some sizzle and things like that.
I like that word, sizzle.
Sizzle, yeah. It's one of those words. It's like you got warmth, sizzle, soundstage. Like soundstage, depth of field. But I mean, I'm not going to say like, bacon frying, like, it's just sizzle, right? Like sizzle, sparkle's another one.
And I find that when we use those terminologies, if I'm at a practice, let's say, and people interpret it differently. So I might say I want to be more sizzle on that, and the other guy just goes in the complete opposite direction.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. That's
you have to explain what sizzle means to you.
Yeah, that's a big one. Like when it comes to communication, that's a really big one for me. Is I have to get on the same page. Like just to make sure we're talking about the same. Yes. Same thing here. Like squashed to me means, kind of all the dynamics being removed. That's kind of across the board, but sometimes somebody might mean something else. Like some people might think compressed means it's quieter, and, in effect, it kind of is in some ways, but, sometimes I have to get on the same page, but again, like I have to kind of use my instinct and hone in on that and think like, okay, I wouldn't really call this record, like I wouldn't say this needs any more warmth. If somebody's asking for warmth, then they mean kind of more like upper mid-range area, which I wouldn't consider warmth, but sometimes I really do have to get on the same page with people about that just to clarify.
But it seems like it's an art, really. You're working kind of with a sonic palette as such, Brad, and creating define creating and mastering, if you can, for yourself.
I mean, I'm here in a support fashion. I'm not, I'm here to help bands do what they want. I'm here to help them. I got to leave my ego at the door, and it's real important for me to do that. And it's important if I want to stay successful and active in what I do to keep my ego at the door, and to, if a band is wanting to go a different direction than what I've done, I got to be okay with that. I'm here to help them achieve what they want. So, but I've also got to balance that with my own little touches and my own little art and things like that. So, I mean, there's some things that I would be, and at the end of the day, there's some decisions that I would make on mastering that I would be really, really proud of, because it's things that helped the record get to the next level. And there's some things where I just kind of take a step back and just, light touch, and I'm still just as proud of that because I've still helped the band do what they want. Maybe sometimes I question, like, maybe if I would have pushed it a little bit more, like, a little, like, colored it just a little bit more, maybe it could have been, or maybe the band was quick to approve something. But I mean, at the end of the day, they know what they want, and I'm not here to question that. And I'm not a member of the band. I'm not a producer. I'm a mastering engineer. And like I said, I just got to leave my ego at the door, but still kind of add my own.
It's the human element to it,
Right.
It's when bands fucking think they can kind of run a mastering through a preset and walk away, That's fucking...
It's a non-enviable task, to be fair, because you have so many personalities that you're dealing with, and one person's idea of what they want the thing to sound like might differ from the other guy. And a lot of the times I find with bands, they don't know what they want to sound like. They think they do, but they don't actually know what it is that they're looking for at the end of the day, what the end product is going to sound like. They think they do, and they have reference points, but then you put it in that space for them, and they're like, that's not what I want. And you're back to square one.
And for me, like the goal I always have is to give them something better than what they have in mind. And that might sound contradictory to what I said, but like my goal is to give them something better than what they want. And like I said, they know what they want. If they get something and they're even happier than they would be. And there's times too where, I think that one thing sounds better than, I think that the band might be that I think that maybe they took a step back with a pass or something like that. But again, it's my job to facilitate them making a record. And I will chime in if it's a big deal. If it's a lateral move, I mean, I'm going to stay out of the game. And if it's a band full of strong personalities, I'm just going to, light a fuse and run. But I mean, that's when I can tell, because the job might get put on hold for a week and a half or so. And then
you get the vibe
like,
pretty quickly. Or
like I've been dealing with the guitar player, and then the drummer emails me. And I'm like, okay, all right, I sense conflict here. So I mean, it's just.
Yeah, and you know what? That's the human side of things, and long may it last, because like the day when fucking AI takes over, or fucking, Can you see
real
that?
Sugar in this drink I'm drinking? If you give me a sugar-free one of these, or with artificial sugar, artificial sweetener, I'm going to tell the difference. So like I said before, like you show me when they perfect artificial sweetener, and I'll be worried about AI doing a superior job than the human element. Because
just on that, how do you feel about amplifier model?
They've come incredibly far. Yeah.
What's that, Howard?
So digital modeling amps, so that replicating the sound of a tube amp, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, I was playing around with Taylor Young's presets, the STL stuff that he did, and it's quite impressive. I mean, the stock stuff that comes with like Persona Studio One is impressive. They've come a long way with that, and it's not going to ruin your record. Like the lead sounds, especially, like the last record I played guitar on, I did all the leads through the UAD, through some UAD stuff. It's impressive. It's really neat. And you can do a lot with modeled guitar stuff in recordings, and you eliminate some problem areas with microphones. Like you run into a lot of problems with combining microphones or mic placement or consistency. If somebody bumps a microphone in the studio, you make those problems a little less. You make those problems less problematic when you start using amplifier models. You've still got, often still have ribbon mic models and dynamic mic models at your disposal that you can screw up phase with and shit like that. But it makes things a lot easier and more accessible. But like, I think when you start going with live, there's nothing like pushing air, you're going to push air anyway, but with like actual, like the actual amp pushing the air, right? Like I think you're going to like, and we're getting close too, even, with a lot of those modeling amps that are out these days, but like, I think that's where you're going to hear most of those differences when you're in the room with it. And having said that, that's where you come back to the caveat of recording with modeled amplifiers, that like you get inspiration from that sometimes, from being in the same room as your loud amplifier. Yeah. That might make you as a guitar player make certain decisions, especially like when you're improvising or like coming up with solo ideas or things like that, or just playing. Like sometimes it's just better to be in front of the amp, and that's hard to model. It's hard to get for certain people to get closer, the inspiration, isn't it? Though
it really does feel like it's getting closer. But I know what you mean. It's when you're capturing a band's essence, it really is about how they present themselves live and in the studio and so on. And it's very hard to replicate that with digital modeling so far. But I think we're getting really close to it. It's just capturing, I think, the personal effect that a digital amp would have on a person in a room. It's not the same as a guy standing in front of us and feeling it out and getting that kind of emotion going and investment in it. We're not there yet, but it's getting increasingly closer, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you can, like, there's nothing wrong with layering your guitar tracks, right? Like do one layer, do one pass live, and then do another pass of overdubs with a different amp that you've got a model of. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, and you're going to get some cool results doing that. So it gives you a more layered, a more layered sound with a more layered guitar sound, a thicker guitar sound. You've got some playing inconsistencies with your, unless you're just completely like jaw clenched tight, everything's got to be, like I like having some slop to the different layers and maybe some tuning inconsistencies there that give it a kind of a full sound,
life.
But like,
give it a life. There you go.
So, I mean, we're almost there. I'm not going to say we're almost there because I don't know where there is, but I think that we've come a long way with guitar modeling software.
We've come a long way from the Line 6 pod kidney fucking things. Marshall
and even those, like you can still use those for certain things. And if you were in a crunch and needed to do guitar leads or something like that, like you could still get away with it and color it a little bit in the mix or whatever. But like, even those, I mean, they don't sound that bad.
But Howard, you always struck me as someone that's kind of minimalistic.
Very much so, Richie.
I like that.
I've got a tuning pedal. I've got fucking hell, I can't even think what it is. An Ibanez overdrive, and every now and again use a DD7 delay, and that's it.
Your pedal boards stress me out, man. I see somebody with a big ass.
Troubleshooting them is a nightmare, when something goes wrong at a show. Fuck that.
Man, I saw a band once. They had to literally stop playing because the guy didn't know which one of his pedals was bad. Like, I'm serious. Like, it's like that stresses me out. I see that. I'm like, dude, like, no, keep me away from that. And so, and not only that, but like,
I can't get aboard with it.
Man, like half the shows we played, like we would show up and the show had to be over at 10, and they booked 6 bands on the bill. And the band before us quits playing at 9:30 and we're like, okay, we got to set up and play quick. The last thing I want to do is like be plugging in all my pedals and hold on, guys. And or there a house show where like people are literally like pushing the mic into my face. I don't want them stepping all over my pedals. I plug straight into the amp.
It's like having a mini traffic jam on stage. It
stresses me out.
Especially when you've got really good gear, when you've got gear that you've invested in terms of an amplifier. You want to hear the amplifier roar. You want to hear it come out through everything that you're doing and not be, I don't know, messed with in between. You want to be as close to that signal as possible.
I mean, how many different distortion pedals do you need? Like, and if you're gonna buy a phaser, you better be like you better be the next Eddie Van Halen, or you better be okay with using that on one part, right? Like otherwise you're gonna be like, oh, that guy with the phaser on every song, he's got a phaser or a flanger or whatever. Like, delay is a little bit different. Like delay is you use it more as a tool, but like, fuck, man, pedal boards. Oh, not only that, it's like one more thing to make room for.
It's a thing,
no offense to anybody that uses them, but
it's people are just obsessed with it, and I kind of get it to an extent. But I do have a lot of pedals, but I use them at home when I'm messing around and having a bit of crack and trying to have a little bit of fun with playing. But playing live,
the same.
Like the biggest scene in Ireland, I don't know, are you aware of it, Brad? But the biggest scene in Ireland is the Doom sludge scene.
Yeah, and they're big on pedals. They're big on they're big on pedals because they hit a note and then they have enough time to go out and buy one before they have to hit
the next note. So fucking true, man. This guy's going to be watching this going, oh.
I hope they're fucking watching and hope they're listening.
What was the best advice you were given, Brad? I always ask this to producers and masters and engineers. What was the best advice you were given?
Get it sounding right when you record. Leave no questions when you go to tape or when you go to disc. Try to get rid of any questions you have. If your guitar sound is not where you want it and you're recording it, don't think you're going to fix it after it's recorded. Get everything sounding the way you want it. Listen to a rough mix and have that rough mix be close to how you want it, the final mix to sound, and things will be a lot easier. Don't try to do too much in the mix. Don't try to do too much in mastering. Get everything right when you do the tracking. Sometimes it's not easy to do that, but that's one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given with recording. Mastering, God, like I don't know. Couldn't really tell you the best, but like with recording in general and just working with sound, it's definitely like the sounds that you're capturing, getting those right when you capture them. You're not going to go out and catch a bird and expect to turn it into catch a crow and expect to turn it into a dove. It's still a crow.
You can paint.
I don't know why I use that analogy. It's not like I don't go out and catch birds just so everybody knows. I don't know why. There was like a story on NPR the other day about like these guys who were like catching birds and they were doing these songbird battles. It was like, I don't know. So maybe that was in my head. I don't know. Yeah. Who the fuck catches birds? You got to be
You got to be a bit of a fucking sicko.
God, you got to feed the birds. And use a phaser on every song. Anyway, no, that's cool. I don't know why I use that analogy, but yeah, I mean, you just can't. You're limited on the transformation that you can do as you get down the line, right? Like the amount of movement that you can make before it hits that microphone is greater than the amount of movement you can make after it. So yeah.
One other thing, how did you come across your studio?
This place has been here for over 30 years, and I had built a mastering studio in my basement that was really small, and we had a kid, and it was really small, and it was getting more difficult. Like I was getting a lot more work, and it was getting more difficult to work from home. And this room was sitting here empty for a long time, for 20 years. It was kind of a storage closet here. It was Studio B in a building that has 3 studios. So there's a Studio A, which is the main room of the big recording studio across the hall. There's Studio C, which is kind of a smaller, more overdub or like voiceover focused studio. And then this was Studio B, which was yeah, it was in here. There was a lot of, they would use it as like an auxiliary tracking room if they were tracking bass or something like that. But a good friend of mine, Stan Wright, from Buzzer Howl, was working out of here. He was renting part of the main studio, and I came across it through him, and just lucked out. And yeah, it's been here for over 30 years, the building as a studio. Poison Idea recorded Kings of Punk here in, I believe, 87. There's been a lot of good music come out of this place. There were some really, like, some tapes in the basement for a long time, just some classic stuff, classic bands. And I'm lucky, again, to be here.
Yeah. How old now is Audiosiege at this stage, Brad?
Actually just turned 11, I guess, in March, I believe. Yeah. So 11 years, been doing it.
Come on.
And the nicest praise you've received yet?
Just,
man, you've worked with a lot of bands, man. What is the one thing that sticks out that you went, thank you? Anytime I get handwritten notes, like, or even if it's on the box, I try to save all those. I'll put them with the records. So, I mean, a lot of times it's just seeing kind of the happiness in what they write with the note. It's I don't know. I compartmentalize, like, praise. Like, I don't use praise as I'm very humble. I don't like to use praise as kind of a as a credit to myself or anything like that. But, like, I think just people being really thankful and being, like, helping somebody along the way. And when people say that I've was good with communicating with them, I think that's always a good thing, because I feel like I could always be better with communication, or, like, faster to respond to emails and things like that. But I mean, the bottom line is I get to work, and I want to work. I want to work on music, and I might, like, I try to answer emails every couple days or something. I'm not like one of those, like, write you back immediately, but, like, I think when people just are grateful, I think when they're happy with it. There was one thing I had saved on my screen, my computer one time. It was like a screenshot of somebody's email, and it was like, "This record is really important to me. Make it heavy." And that's all it was. And so, I kind of put it there as a reminder that, like, these records are really important to people, and it's their baby. I'm the doctor that's got to keep from dropping the baby. Okay.
There's so many steps in the process, Richie, when you start out recording an album or whatever it is. There's so many steps that be taken, and the last step is usually mastering. And by the time you come around to getting something mastered, you're exhausted from it. You're up and you're down. You're worried. You're overthinking. You're questioning. And then when you get it back and you hear it, and you kind of go, that sounds what I wanted to sound like. It can be overwhelming at times, And then sometimes when it's done right, you really do feel that connection, or feel that urge to go out and connect with the person who's put the cherry on the cake at the end of the whole thing. Yeah. But yeah,
that's always a great feeling. It's gratifying.
It is, yeah. It must be very rewarding for you to experience that over and over again,
It's quite rewarding. And that, like I said, that's why I say when bands send me their records, somebody will email me saying, "Hey, our record's out. Like, can I send you one?" I always offer to pay for it. I don't expect them to send me one for free. They paid me to master their record. I don't mind paying them to usually they're like, I insist. I'm like, okay, but, like, I always save those notes. I always put them in that record, just if I want to break it out, just to see it and remind myself. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. But yeah, like, by the end, like you hit the nail on the head. By the time you get to that point, like, there's been a lot of ups and downs emotionally, like a lot of exhaustion. And I deal with a lot of people who are at that stage, or who are start questioning the decisions that have been made along the way. And so there's a lot of bedside manner that has to go into that as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Brad Boatright, thank you so much for your contribution to heavy metal music. Thanks for coming on the show, man. Salute.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks. And thanks for...
It's a little early for a beer here, so I'll just have my vitamin water here.
And crucially, thank you for your contribution as well to Irish metal.
My pleasure.
Fantastic.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, so you've been listening to Brad Boatright. Hit up Audiosiege if you want your record mastered. No better man. And if you're listening to the show, hit that subscribe button and support Irish metal. Thank you. That's it, man.